Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott. Now, we have a very full show today. After the news, we'll be talking with Rob Mark about an accident that occurred 2 weeks ago in which fighters chased a beach bonanza with an unconscious pilot. And then we'll talk about other recent hypoxia-related accidents. We also have news of a 5-hour course on landings that you can take online for free. And finally, we have a fun interview with the creator of the Pilots Without Pants calendar, which is a fundraiser for aviation scholarships. Last week in episode 206, we talked about helicopter wake vortex accidents and incidents in which an aircraft passes through the turbulent air left behind by a helicopter. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out. And if you're loving this show and want to give back some of that love, please leave us a 5-star review in whatever podcast player that you're listening to me now. This week in the news, a new fuel is available that works on most piston engines. A Southwest crew came to blows with each other. And finally, we'll tell you why an NYPD helicopter was in hot pursuit of another helicopter. All this and more, and the news starts now. From avweb.com, FAA approves 600 engines for GAMI unleaded fuel. The FAA has approved an additional 611 certified piston aircraft engines to run on GAMI's G100UL high-octane unleaded avgas in an FAA-approved model list that was posted last week on Thursday. With the announcement, about 70% of existing engines in service are now able to use the fuel, which received FAA approval in July. Another approved list in which these engines are mated to approved airframes will be coming soon. The approved list covers most lower-powered engines by Lycoming, up to 360 cubic inch displacement, or CID, and Continental up to 470 CID plus many Franklins. The list also includes dozens of radial engines by Pratt & Whitney and Curtiss-Wright, up to some of the largest models. Engines not on the list include the high-powered 6-cylinder Continental and Lycoming engines that power most of the commercial piston fleet. Although they account for about 30% of in-service engines, they burn more than 80% of the avgas sold in the U.S. AOPA says GAMI CEO George Braley is expecting the big engines to be approved in 2022. GAMI is working with Avfuel to distribute the fuel and is concentrating in areas where 100 low-lead sales are being phased out. From NBCLosAngeles.com, what jetpack man in the sky near LAX might be. Authorities investigating a series of possible jetpack sightings over Los Angeles believe they may have identified an explanation for the mysterious reports. Quote, one working theory is that pilots might have seen balloons, the FBI and FAA said in statements after NBC Los Angeles obtained police video and photos that appear to show a human-shaped inflatable toy floating thousands of feet above Beverly Hills. The crew aboard an LAPD helicopter captured the images last year, about 2 weeks after the second reported sighting of a jetpack a few miles further south over the Culver City or Century City areas. The inflatable appeared to be a life-sized Jack Skellington, the main character in Tim Burton's 1993 movie A Nightmare Before Christmas. While officials told NBC Los Angeles that the police encounter could have been a single balloon that broke loose from a Halloween display and drifted into the sky, it also emboldened one theory shared among federal authorities investigating the sightings, that pilots might have seen human-shaped inflatables or other balloons that had drifted into the landing approach routes into LAX. There have been 3 sightings reported by pilots lining up to land at LAX. Officials said that after more than a year of investigation, federal agents have been unable to find additional witnesses who saw or recorded video of any of the flying objects. Quote, the FAA has worked closely with the FBI to investigate every reported jetpack sighting, the FAA said. So far, none of these sightings have been verified. The LAPD video was provided to the federal investigators some months ago. It was recorded in November 2020 by 2 officers on a routine patrol flight near the Hollywood Hills. Retired airline pilot and aviation consultant Ross Amer said the balloon images seemed to fit with what the jet pilots reported. He told NBC LA that he believed pilots had made honest reports to ATC, but at the relative high speed of a jetliner on approach, the flight crews may have only caught a glimpse of the objects. Quote, there's a very good possibility that previous ones were also balloons, and pilots mistook them as jetpacks. From avweb.com, FAA to take regulatory action over 5G altimeter interference. The FAA plans to issue a special airworthiness information bulletin and an airworthiness directive in coming days concerning the rollout of 5G cellular phone service in 46 major metro areas of the U.S. on December 5th, according to Reuters. The actions are expected to limit the use of automated systems on aircraft that rely on radar altimeters, also called radio altimeters, and it's possible that flight delays and cancellations will result. Reuters also quoted a letter from FAA Deputy Administrator Bradley Mims that says the agency shares, quote, the deep concern about the potential impact to aviation safety resulting from interference to radar altimeter performance from 5G network operations in the C-band. In an auction of radio spectrum last year, the major telecoms paid a total of $78 billion in an FCC auction to get access to a thin slice of the available radio frequencies to carry 5G signals. Those signals will be in the 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz band. Radar altimeters operate in the 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz frequency range, and the fear is that the nearby powerful cell signals may cause interference for the avionics. The FCC approved the use of the spectrum for 5G, saying well-designed radio altimeter equipment should not ordinarily receive any significant interference, let alone harmful interference, but aviation groups say the risk for thousands of aircraft is real, and the FAA seems to agree. The precise nature of the impending rulemaking hasn't yet been revealed, but radar altimeters are fundamental to the operation of ILS systems since they provide the primary altitude information for decision height in Cat 2 and Cat 3 approaches. They're also the source of altitude data for ground proximity warning systems. The U.S. approach to 5G differs from that of Canada, which is also concerned about the interference. As reported earlier, Canadian radio spectrum authorities have placed restrictions on the use of 5G transmitters near major airports to ensure there is no interference with radio altimeters. Major telecoms in Canada are protesting the move, saying it will keep them from offering the latest services to many businesses and private customers in the industrialized and populated areas around major airports. And in a related story from finance.yahoo.com, AT&T and Verizon say they will delay 5G expansion over aircraft safety issues. The Wall Street Journal has learned that AT&T and Verizon are delaying their C-band rollouts by at least a month to help the FAA address aircraft interference concerns. They had originally planned to use the newly available frequencies on December 5th, but AT&T said it was pushing its launch to January 5th after the Transportation Department requested a delay. And one thing that neither of these two articles mention is something I talked about briefly in the Airplane Geeks podcast last week, and that is that radio altimeters are also essential to the operation of Garmin's Autoland system, which has been rolled out in the Piper M600 and the Cirrus Vision Jet. So that's something they're going to have to take a look at as well. From USA Today, a Southwest pilot and flight attendant fought over masks. One was cited for alleged assault. A Southwest Airlines pilot was cited for alleged assault and battery after a mask dispute with a flight attendant at a California hotel amid pandemic political discord at the nation's largest domestic carrier. The incident happened October 18th at a hotel bar in San Jose, California, where the crew spent the night after a flight, according to police records and company and union officials. The case has been referred to the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office for review and possible charges, according to Sergeant Christian Camarillo, Public Information Officer for the San Jose PD. Camarillo said, quote, the event involved a disagreement over mask wearing or mask, and declined to provide more details. The DA's office is reviewing the case. From flyer.co.uk, that's Flyer Magazine, Pipistrel's hybrid electric four-seater flies. Pipistrel's four-seat touring aircraft, the Panthera, has completed the first set of flight tests equipped with a hybrid electric propulsion system. The flights were made in mid-October from Slovenia and included all-electric takeoffs. The power unit is one of two being developed by the EU-funded MAHEPA consortium. MAHEPA stands for Modular Approach to Hybrid Electric Propulsion Architecture. The first power unit uses a fuel-driven generator to charge the batteries and power the electric motor, while the second relies on fuel cells to produce power-enabling zero-emission flight. Data from flight tests will be used to model future operating scenarios of hybrid electric aviation, paving the way toward greener aircraft. The Pipistrel Panthera is currently available as a non-type certified aircraft. EASA certification is targeted for 2022, says Pipistrel, when the engine will be fitted with a 260 horsepower avgas-burning Lycoming IO 540. From planeandpilotmag.com, FAA proposes requiring second-class medicals for commercial balloon pilots. Later this month, the FAA will publish a NPRM requiring commercial balloon pilots to meet the same medical standards as pilots of other commercial aircraft. Previously, balloon pilots had been exempted from the FAA medical standards, but as FAA Administrator Steve Dixon said, quote, balloon pilots are responsible for the safety of their passengers. This proposed rule would make it so balloon pilots meet the same medical requirements as pilots of other commercial aircraft. With the exemption in place, the FAA has worked with commercial balloon pilots and operators to encourage everyone to abide by no-nonsense standards for flight safety, such as those imposed on commercial pilots of other aircraft. The partnership encouraged pilots to be mindful of maintaining a high level of fitness to fly, but in the end it was still voluntary. The NTSB referenced recent catastrophic balloon crashes, which were possibly caused at least in part by the pilot's lack of fitness to fly. 2 high-profile crashes weighed heavily on the decision to create a new rule. One crash in Lockhart, Texas in 2016 killed all 16 aboard when the balloon, flying in conditions of low visibility, hit power lines, caught fire, and fell. The NTSB found that a contributing factor was the pilot's medical conditions, attention deficit disorder, and depression. The second crash took place in New Mexico earlier this year. Preliminary information showed that pilot had illegal drugs in his system at the time the balloon hit power lines and crashed. After the Texas crash, the deadliest balloon disaster in U.S. history, Congress passed a law requiring the medical exemption for commercial balloon pilots be eliminated. The new NPRM is in response to that law. From aviationpros.com, UND pilot was dealing with mental health concerns. The UND commercial aviation student killed in an October 18th plane crash suffered from mental health issues, and his family has established a memorial fund to support the mental health of UND aviation students. Robert Krause, Dean of Aerospace at UND, said administrators were previously unaware of any mental health issues student pilot John Hauser may have been dealing with, but Hauser's family confirmed that was the case. Krause said the official cause of the crash will be made known when the NTSB releases its final report, which could take up to a year. A preliminary NTSB report reported there were no mechanical problems with the plane. Krause told the Herald, quote, we don't want to do anything official until the NTSB report comes out, but his family has allowed us to say yes, there were mental health concerns. Krause said there were no warning signs prior to the crash and that Hauser was an outstanding student who had good grades and was progressing well through UND's program. Krause said it's difficult to look back and determine what Hauser was thinking at that time, which fuels speculation about the crash. Quote, everybody thought everything was normal, and then this event happened, Krause said. Everyone is scratching their head as to why. Were there missed signals, or is there something that could have been done prior? Hauser was killed on a night flight to Fargo, where he was scheduled to practice taking off and landing before returning to Grand Forks. Krause said the flight is a normal way for students to gain hours in the cockpit. A problem particular to aviation, Krause said, is that pilots don't want to see a doctor and they really don't like to go see a therapist out of concern they may be grounded for a medical or mental health issue. When it comes to mental health, conditions including psychosis, bipolar disorder, and severe personality disorder disqualify a pilot from obtaining a medical certificate, according to the FAA's website dealing with pilot mental fitness. Krause said Hauser was not affected by those conditions, but the stigma against seeking counseling for a mental health issue remains, and Krause said UND is working to address it. We have ways to say there are ways to talk to somebody, and this is how you do it, he said. Mental health professionals are obligated to report pilots who show signs of a severe mental illness, Krause said, but that matter isn't always cut and dry. Simply feeling stressed or sad does not necessarily mean a pilot, even a student pilot, will have the medical certificate called into question. Krause said there are degrees of okay before a pilot can be grounded, but it's the fear of losing their flight status that keeps them away. According to the NTSB preliminary report, the Piper PA-28-181 airplane operated by Hauser made a rapid descent into the ground not long after the plane took off. From the OCRegister.com, 2 Orange County men charged with pointing lasers at helicopters. Now, this story has an interesting twist at the end. 2 Orange County men were facing charges in separate cases for pointing lasers at law enforcement helicopters, the FBI said on November 4th. Both men were arrested on suspicion of knowingly pointing lasers at the aircraft, which threatened safety by potentially distracting the pilot and impairing their vision. Brett Wayne Parkins, 42 of Huntington Beach, was arrested Wednesday on suspicion of pointing a laser at a Huntington Beach police helicopter on July 25th, records show. He was accused of pointing the laser from his home, and investigators were able to track it back to his home, said an FBI spokeswoman. Parkins made his first court appearance Thursday and was released on $15,000 bail with other stipulations such as surrendering his passport. In a separate case, Eric Jason Suarez, 47 of Santa Ana, was arrested October 13th on suspicion of pointing a laser at a sheriff's department helicopter, the FBI said. He agreed to plead guilty on October 26 and was expected to be sentenced on November 22nd. In Suarez's case, he was accused of sitting alone in his parked car in an intersection when he struck the helicopter's cockpit with a beam at least 4 times, court records show. The beam blinded the helicopter pilot and tactical flight officer for several seconds, according to records. Officers found Suarez and followed his car when he drove away and threw his laser outside of the car window, but officers were able to find the laser and stopped his car, court records show. Now here's the amazing part. Suarez was convicted of pointing a laser at another aircraft in 2015 and was accused of pointing a laser at another one in March, records show. Suarez faces up to 5 years in prison, yet I'm shocked that somebody would do this multiple times after having been previously arrested. And finally, from WOMB.com, High Sky Pursuit, NYPD follows chopper from Brooklyn to Lakewood, New Jersey. The NYPD chased a private helicopter from Brooklyn to Lakewood Airport last week on Thursday, but did not make any arrest. The pursuits began when the private helicopter landed twice in a vacant lot in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn around 1:30 p.m., according to the New York Daily News and the Lakewood Scoop. A passenger got on the helicopter during the second landing. Then it was followed by the NYPD Aviation unit to Lakewood, where the chopper landed at the airport. Video shows NYPD officers walking over to the chopper. A photo shows 4 individuals speaking on the tarmac. After a conversation, NYPD officers left the airport, according to the Scoop. Airport on-site manager Keith McKenzie told the Daily News their conversation was cordial. Police sources told the Daily News that the NYPD was concerned about the helicopter landing in a neighborhood and was unaware the pilot had permission from the air traffic control tower at Kennedy Airport to make the landing. Now, that to me sounds a little bit odd. ATC might have said that the landing was approved at their own risk, but certainly they wouldn't give permission to land on a private lot. Per the New York Daily News, the pilot told police he didn't know that he couldn't land on a city street or vacant lot, police sources said. Now, that to me sounds a little suspect. I think most helicopter pilots are taught about where they can and cannot land. The pilot said that since the Brooklyn flight, he has spoken to the FAA, the FBI, and the NYPD. In 2019, members of New York's congressional delegation introduced the Improving Helicopter Safety Act, which would limit non-essential chopper flights. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up, our discussion with Rob Mark about hypoxia-related accidents. And after that, we'll be talking with Annemarie Bain about the Pilots Without Pants calendar. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. We'll get to Rob Mark in just one moment, but I wanted to let you know that after you hear that segment, I'll have some comments on the Canadian oxygen rules and about an interesting study that found that a large percentage of business jet pilots don't follow the oxygen mask rules, 2 topics that came up during our conversation. Now let me tell you a little bit about Rob Mark. He's worked as both an air traffic controller and as an airline, corporate pilot, and CFI. Rob publishes the Jetwine blog at jetwine.com, and you can find his writing in the pages of Business and Commercial Magazine, which is part of the Aviation Week group. And now here's our conversation with Rob Mark. Well, Rob, welcome to the show. Great to have you back here. How you doing?
Hey, it's really nice to be back with you, Max. And here in Chicago, we're watching the leaves fall as the temperatures drop, and our big tree in the backyard has dumped thousands in the backyard for me to play with this weekend.
That's great. Well, thanks for taking some time to talk with us here. Hey, you and I have been talking about a couple of different accidents that are all hypoxia and oxygen related. And we came across one from about a week and a half ago that doesn't seem to have hit the aviation press at this point, which is stunning because it's really an amazing accident. Tell us about this crash that ended up in Wisconsin.
Well, there was an accident that occurred about a week ago as we record this, maybe a bit longer, where the pilot of a single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza with a turbine conversion in it or on it, and that is essentially replacing the piston engine with a Pratt & Whitney PT6. And it obviously goes faster, it goes higher, And in this case, the pilot was flying up from Texas toward Wisconsin, and he kind of suddenly went dark on air traffic. It looked like he was flying at about 15.5, so probably VFR. And then suddenly he stopped talking to ATC, and as the airplane started to climb, and of course, once you get above 180, you're supposed to be under positive control on an IFR flight plan, and this person wasn't. And the airplane made it all the way to 24 flight level 240. And then it flew for a while, and then it came down.
Yeah, so he was initially at 16,000 feet for about 23 minutes. Now, at 16,000 feet, we know he had to be on oxygen because the Beechcraft is not a pressurized aircraft. And so that would have been perfectly legal for him to be there at 16,000 as long as he was using oxygen. But then it says that the plane began to climb. It says over the next 30 minutes, it climbed to just over 24,000 feet for roughly the next 97 minutes, where it stayed up there at flight level 240. And interestingly, this is one of those few cases where fighter jets were sent up to take a look at the airplane and see what they could determine. And of course, what do they find?
Pilot was slumped over in the cockpit. And we have seen that so many times. And now, let's be serious. Do we know that the pilot didn't have a heart attack? No, of course we don't know that. But when you look at some of the similarities between this accident and the handful that you have, I know, sitting on your desk, there are some similarities in the sense that pilots either don't use the oxygen that they have available to them, or something causes the system to fail, and the pilots pass out from lack of oxygen.
Yeah, I was able to remember at least 3 of these accidents, and when I started looking, I found some more. And they're not common, but it seemed like every few years we have another one of them. I think the one that most people remember is the Payne Stewart accident from 1999, in which a Learjet took off, and very shortly after takeoff, they had a decompression of the cockpit, and everybody basically became unconscious in the airplane. And then there was a Mooney in 2009, which crashed in Indiana. He'd been flying along at flight level 230. They sent the fighter jets up and saw the same thing. Pilot slumped over. I remembered one Cirrus accident of this type, but there were actually 2 that I found, and they weren't that long ago. In 2014, there was a Cirrus which was flying over Virginia, and it kept going, and it crashed in the Atlantic. And again, it was up in the flight levels. It had gone through a restricted area in the Washington, D.C. area, which is why they sent the fighter jets up to check that one out. And most recently, there was one just 3 years ago in 2018, and that Cirrus crashed in the Gulf of Mexico. And a common theme on all of these is that while the pilot might not have been dead at the time, they were unconscious, and the aircraft continued flying on its own, and then it eventually crashed. Now, interestingly, I hadn't realized there have actually been a couple of commercial airliners that have had similar kinds of problems. In 2005, Helios Airways was flying in Greece in a Boeing 737, and apparently both of the pilots forgot to push the button for pressurization of the cabin. And so the aircraft climbed, and everybody basically lost consciousness, and the aircraft crashed, killing, I believe, 121 people. There was another incident in which essentially the same thing happened, but the pilots were able to catch it and bring themselves back down to the ground. And of course, the passengers were, some of them were unconscious, sick, and so on. So it's really amazing that even commercial airliners sometimes have this problem.
Well, and what's even more interesting about the commercial air transport side is that most of them have a very loud warning signal in the aircraft that once the cabin goes through 10,000 feet climbing, they'll hear a bell, a buzzer, a horn, something, and a light that will say, cabin or something, to alert the pilots to the fact that the oxygen's not coming in. How they bypass that, I don't know. Same thing with the Helios one. But of course, again, we don't know that they weren't warned and perhaps tried to take action, but were unable for some reason because the system didn't work. Well, then that is also something that transport pilots are trained for. You you pull the power back, you put the oxygen mask on, pull the power back, you roll the airplane over, and you get down. But again, that happens so very seldom, and it seems to happen so very seldom in GA airplanes that we think pilots just say, it's not a big deal. I mean, I'm not going to run out of oxygen. I mean, I know if I get up high, I'm supposed to have it, but I'm aware enough to know if I'm getting sleepy or whatever. And it's too often they don't know. Look at this other one that we found in British Columbia from just a couple of years back in a Navajo, which is a twin-engine piston airplane, of which I spent a fair amount of my time. And they were out doing some survey work out near the Calgary area in British Columbia. And there was a technician in the back, pilot in the front, and they decided to fly back IFR to Calgary. And what we found out was that when the aircraft was about 40 miles from Calgary, air traffic started to sequence them into the terminal airspace, and the pilot was asked to slow the airplane down, descend to 13,000 feet. I think they were up as high as 15 at one point. And suddenly the airplane departed controlled flight, and it crashed into a mountain near Mount Ray, which is about, I think it's almost 10,500 feet, killed both of them. But what was really interesting is the Transport Safety Board of Canada, when they released their report, it had the most interesting side note to it about oxygen, that they talked about all the things that the pilot had done. It was all in line with the procedures on the Navajo. And at one point, the pilot went and showed the assistant in the back how to put on his oxygen mask to make sure it was working properly. So the pilot put on his own, and a few seconds later put it down. He was at 15,000 feet. And I know you read this too, and I went, what? Why would you take it off at 15,000 feet? We do not know. We do not know why this happened, but what happened in the sequence following this is that the pilot passed out, they lost control of the airplane, and it crashed into a mountain. I mean, again, and this pilot was not new to this airplane, nor to the work they were doing. So it makes you wonder, perhaps the oxygen mask, wasn't on properly, or who knows what. But the only reason that we had such a detailed description was that they had a device on board, which I cannot for the life of me remember the name of.
I've got it. It's the Apereo Vision Systems 1000.
Right. And it worked almost as well as a digital flight recorder on a transport airplane, except that it works with a camera, and somebody had bumped the camera, so we couldn't see everything the pilot was doing, but we had a lot of data. And all I know is the pilot took the mask off, and same thing, just like these other ones, they can't breathe at that altitude. And the worst part is that it affects everybody a little differently. You or I might be able to go to 15 and feel fine for 10 minutes. And then there are people that would get above 12 for just a few minutes, especially somebody that smokes, and kind of get woozy. And so, oxygen deprivation is nothing to screw around with.
Well, it is pretty astounding. There were some clues at the time that there was a problem. I'm not sure if ATC fully picked up on it, but the pilot was at 14,000 feet. And you might think, 14,000 feet, hey, there's no problem. I can hang out there as long as I want. And yet this gentleman at 14,000 feet, he was asked to read back his altitude. And instead they asked him for his indicated airspeed, but the pilot read back the altitude of 14,000. That's a pretty odd mistake. They asked him one more time for his indicated airspeed, but the pilot read back the ground speed instead. Pilot was then asked to slow to 150 knots, descend to 13,000 feet, and he started the descent, and somehow eventually it ended up uncontrolled. It says that the aircraft was in clouds, by the way, at 14,000, exited the clouds at 13,300. and continued to descend through 11,500, where ATC asked him if he wanted to report a situation. The pilot then declared an emergency. By that point, the aircraft was in a spin. So apparently he got too slow, but he was hypoxic enough that he was unaware of what was going on. The system that they have in that aircraft sells for about $10,000. It's not, an inexpensive system, but it provided far more detail than I think I've ever read in just about any accident report before, because we had blow-by-blow, second-by-second description of everything that was happening in that plane.
Well, and what made this one even worse is that on the way in, he lost the right engine. We don't know what happened to the right engine, but we had very precise data. And when I was reading this, the journalist in me said, "This is great, but where are they getting this information from?" And I'd heard about these Aperio systems, and because people were suggesting they be used in helicopters for data storage. And it'll record the pitch, roll, and yaw, give you GPS positions, ground speed, vertical speed. It'll image the cockpit so you can see what was going on. It'll pick up the area audio, meaning within the cockpit. And it's great. This is the kind of thing that many consumers have said, airline pilots ought to have this. But that has been a very large area of controversy, because the Airline Pilots Association said, no, we're not doing that, because they're worried that some of these videos might be used for disciplinary action against pilots. So they've never quite made it to that. But short of the video, we have some pretty incredible data parameters that we're able to record on new airplanes these days, but not on these GA airplanes. Again, with that Bonanza up in Wisconsin, I mean, we were looking at the time of useful consciousness, and I believe, what was it at 24? It was about 5 minutes. So the pilot may have had time but the trouble is with hypoxia, you get very happy, and you just think everything is wonderful, and you're not thinking clearly, and who knows what the airplane was trying to tell him, but he just wasn't catching on. Think about the poor guy in the back who may have known something was going on and could do nothing about it.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about time to unconsciousness is it's different if you look at how long it takes you to essentially fall asleep during a normal climb versus a rapid decompression, some kind of explosive event. In that case, the time to unconsciousness is usually about half. So I'm looking at some data here that suggest the lowest one they have is flight level 180. Normally, 20 to 30 minutes at flight level 180, you're going to be asleep. If rapid decompression occurs, 10 to 15 minutes, and you're going to be asleep. Flight level 250, 3 to 5 minutes. If it's explosive decompression, 1.5 to 3.5 minutes. Now, these are not terribly high altitudes. And of course, the oxygen rules, pretty straightforward down in the United States. They're actually a little bit different in Canada. As I recall, they require oxygen at slightly lower altitudes than we require here in the U.S. In the U.S., anytime you're between 12,500 and 14,000 feet, for more than 30 minutes, you require oxygen. So if you stay at 12,500 for 30 minutes, you need oxygen. If you stay, and of course, this pilot was up at 14,000 feet with no oxygen, and he might have thought, well, gee, I'm at the top altitude for the oxygen rules, I should be just fine. Well, there's a reason there's a 30-minute limit, because as we've seen, you'll eventually become, if not unconscious, severely impaired to the point where you don't even realize that there's a problem. I think it's one thing when we all have problems and we recognize we have a problem, then we can do something about it. I mean, the insidious thing about hypoxia is people don't know that they're having a problem, and the reactions for people are totally different. Some people will be happy, some will be giddy, some may just feel kind of drowsy and sleepy. So everybody's reactions are different. One way to find out what your reaction is like would be to get into a hyperbaric chamber, and there are a few of these scattered around the country. For example, I think here in Northern California, I believe there's one at Beale Air Force Base. I've never done that. Have you ever been in a chamber before to see what that's like?
No, not in a chamber, but some years back, flight safety brought out a class where they could simulate hypoxia by putting no, oxygen cannula on your nose, and then mixing standard oxygen with some other gas. I don't remember what it was, but it simulated being up high. And I was flying in the left seat of some kind of jet, and they said, "Okay, we're going to try it now." And I thought, "Oh, do." Minute or two later, and then suddenly I went, "Oh!" And we were going to prepare for landing. They started reading the checklist, and I was saying really weird things like, "Yeah, let's get them little wheels down. I don't see nothing yet, but them little wheels got to come down, baby." And I was talking really funny when I heard it later, and everybody's laughing because they said, everybody does this. They think, yeah, but it's me. I can handle it. You can't. You cannot. And I love, when we were at NBAA a couple of weeks ago, Honda brought out a new version of the Honda Jet, which is certified for single pilot, and its service ceiling is going to be, I think it was 470. So imagine 47,000 feet, and you have an explosive decompression. And what does that give you? About
5 seconds, it says.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's not much because, of course, there's the holy smokes, what's going on? And
Poof.
you're already out. So I don't know how they cope with that because right now the oxygen's rule in the States is if you're above 35,000 feet, I think, and one of the crew members leaves their station, the other person's supposed to put their oxygen mask on. But what do you do when there's only one crew member? They haven't really addressed that. But I mean, I remember a time years ago in a 91 operation, and I was a dumb co-pilot, and I knew the rule, and we got we were at like 41, and the other guy said, "Well, I'm going to go to the men's room. I'll be back." And I grabbed my oxygen mask and put it on. He said, "Get that thing off." I said,
Wow.
"What's the problem?" He said, "You're going to scare the heck out of the passengers if they see you in that thing." And I went, "Okay," and I took it off because I mean, I was new and I didn't know what I was doing. And I came to realize that there are a lot of professional pilots that don't follow that rule,
Wow.
just assuming it's not going to happen to them.
Not good. Well, let's just talk briefly about possible reasons that people who are using oxygen up above flight level 200, for example, like the Mooney accident, the Beechcraft accident, the two Cirrus accidents, what are some of the things that could go wrong? So, for example, I think that probably the most common thing I think might be going wrong, and by the way, here's the interesting thing. We don't have data on this. We don't know. Everybody's speculating because there have been no cameras on people in these accidents. So we can't really tell for sure exactly why they lost the oxygen flow. But some of the most obvious things that come to mind would be, hey, maybe the hose got kinked, right? You ended up bending it in some way or resting something down on it, and the oxygen's not making it to your mask. What are some of the other things that you can think of as to why oxygen might interrupt?
Well, there might be the bottle might not have been as full as they thought it was before they took off if they checked it. And an awful lot of people don't even look at it in the pre-flight. Now, if it's a portable bottle, it's a little easier because it's probably sitting on the floor, maybe in the back seat or on the back seat. You can look at it again if you do that. But in some of the pressurized airplanes, of course, the oxygen bottle is usually somewhere in the nose compartment, and you've got to pull a few Zeus fasteners and flip up a panel and take a look. And but that's why you do that, so that you know that when you call for it, it's going to deliver oxygen. You don't know that there's not something wrong with the mask. And people go, yeah, okay, there's the bottle, there's the flow, yeah, okay, mask is here. But did you try it? Did you put it on, say, continuous flow, and try and breathe a couple of seconds to see if anything is coming out of it? And a lot of pilots don't. I know that a certain group of pilots that I'm familiar with, professional pilots, would actually, after having a tough night in perhaps a local eating establishment and maybe having a bit too much to drink, within limits, of course, and having a massive headache the next morning. They'd get in the cockpit and take about 2 or 3 slugs of that 100% pure oxygen, and it absolutely cleared up their headache. I didn't do honestly. I never tried it myself, but they've told me it works. But again, at least you'd know the oxygen was flowing. But a lot of people don't even bother to look at it.
Well, I was thinking also about the typical setup with GA aircraft would be a mask attached to a regulator, which then attaches to the oxygen, whether it's built-in oxygen or a bottle. And I think people might misset those regulators, or might forget to turn them on. I can imagine someone who is familiar with the regulator slaps the mask on. Maybe they're already slightly hypoxic because they've been up at altitude for a while, and they forget to turn that little knob and look at the little ball to see at what altitude the oxygen flow is now set for. So that would be a really easy thing to overlook and find that you're not getting oxygen. I think probably the most important thing for anybody who is flying up in the oxygen levels is to carry an oximeter with them. Now, these things are relatively inexpensive, at least compared to everything else that you have to buy for aviation. They're probably in the $50, $60 range. I know that they were in great demand during the pandemic because one of the problems for people who were suffering from the coronavirus was that their oxygen levels would often drop sharply. So these became very much in demand because people wanted to be able to monitor their oxygen levels. Now, for us as pilots, it's really simple. It's a very tiny device. You slip it over one of your fingers, and then it gives you a direct readout. And for example, once you're on oxygen, you should probably see your oxygenation level up in the upper 90s, greater than 95% if you're on oxygen, even at the higher altitudes. If, on the other hand, you find that it's slipped down below 90%, you're in the 80s or something like that, well, there's a problem. Either the regulator has not been turned up enough, and so you're not getting as much of a flow as you should. Maybe the hose is kinked. Maybe you've run out of oxygen. So that, to me, is really something that everybody should carry with them and should use, because there's so many little things that could cause a problem. And at least with the oximeter, you can tell instantly, hey, there's a problem, and then you can start troubleshooting to find where that problem is.
Sure. And of course, when you do see an oximeter registering below 90%, first thing you've got to do is get down. You can troubleshoot later, but you probably won't troubleshoot very accurately if you're already oxygen deprived. And every second is precious because, again, until you get down to 10, 11,000 feet, 12,000 feet, your oxygen's never going to return to normal. And of course, it's not going to return just like that. It's going to take a minute or two for your body to sense that it's in a more dense oxygen environment. So again, you got to get down. That's not, again, it's nothing to fool with.
Well, I think people need to be familiar with the emergency descent procedure for their particular aircraft. Some of the newer modern avionics actually have a built-in emergency descent mode. So, for example, I believe the G3000 has that capability in some of the aircraft. Certainly the Cirrus Perspective has it in the SR20 And the way it works essentially is if you're above, I think about flight level 150, if more than 5 minutes or some number of minutes goes by and you haven't done any key pushes, it will bring up a message that basically says, hey, you're still there and you've got a minute or two to respond. And if you're not, then it gives you a 1 minute warning that says, hey, we're going down. And so if you don't want me to descend automatically, you better push a button. And I think the way it's configured varies by manufacturer. But essentially, it will level off initially at one altitude, usually around 15,000 or 14,000, wait there for a number of minutes, and then head on down a little bit lower. So we've got great tools, all kinds of tools. But the problem, of course, is people either aren't buying oximeters and checking their oxygen flow, or the number of aircraft with EDM mode is still relatively small.
Sure, and the number of new transport category airplanes, business airplanes, Gulfstreams, some of the Embraer aircraft, Textron's jets have that system as well. Because if you're up at 42,000 feet and there's an oxygen problem, it may very well affect either member of the crew, if not both, and the passengers in the back. And there's nothing like some system saying, you know what, this isn't right. and these two pilots are not noticing it. We need to go down. And it'll pull the throttles back, bank the airplane, and get it down really quickly. And I don't think I've heard of anybody being saved by it yet, but there will be eventually. And that's the beauty of this. I remember with the Garmin Autoland, people thought, "Oh, that's kind of silly. Who's going to auto land a little airplane?" But for somebody that's in the right seat next to somebody that's either unconscious for oxygen reasons, or maybe they've had a heart problem, and they go, I'm not a pilot. I don't know what to do. Just push that red button, and the airplane, squawks emergency, talks to air traffic control, takes the airplane on down, and it'll find the airport and land. I mean, that's really pretty gee whiz kind of stuff, and that's relatively recent. Maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago that Garmin first debuted that. And it probably puts a lot of passengers at ease that are kind of worried about little airplanes anyway. But, again, it's pretty cool.
Yep, really excellent technology. Hey, you brought up smoking a while ago, and I ran across a study that kind of quantifies exactly how smoking affects you in this area of hypoxia. It said essentially that smokers can find that the altitude and the time to normal consciousness, essentially that if they smoke, it adds anywhere between 3,500 and 6,500 feet to the altitude that they're at. So just to give an example, we talked about flight level 180. If you have an explosive decompression, your time to consciousness is 10 to 15 minutes. If you're a smoker, it's as if you're almost up at flight level 250. That 10 to 15 minutes drops to 1.5 to 3.5 minutes. So that's about 5-6 times the difference. So that's huge. So smokers, just be aware, you're not going to be conscious as long as the normal table suggests that you will be.
No, and to rehash something I said earlier, and if you do realize that there's something going on, you're already impaired. So when you think I've got to do something, it could take you God knows how long to make a decision that would seem simple. Just get the power back and get down. So, again, oxygen issues are not something to screw around with. And look at how many we've talked about here today where pilots just kind of lost track of what was going on, and it took their lives and often the lives of other people with them.
Well, Rob, as we wrap up here, tell us, where do people find more about you these days? Where is your writing available online?
Of course, I'm always at Jetwine, jetwine.com with Scott Spangler. But these days, my prose may be found in the pages of Business and Commercial Aviation magazine, which is available online. It's part of the Aviation Week group.
Well, thanks so much for joining us again here today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Well, Rob is a great guy, and it's always fun to have him here on the show. I wanted to follow up with a couple thoughts. First, on the Canadian oxygen rules. I looked it up, 605.32.1. It says, where an aircraft is operated at cabin pressure altitudes above 10,000 feet ASL, but not exceeding 13,000 feet ASL, each crew member shall wear an oxygen mask and use supplemental oxygen for any part of the flight at those altitudes that is more than 30 minutes in duration. So that compares here in the U.S. to 12,500 to 14,000. So definitely they do need oxygen at lower altitudes in Canada. Part 2 of this says, where an aircraft is operating at a cabin pressure altitude above 13,000 feet, each person on board shall wear an oxygen mask and use supplemental oxygen for the duration of the flight at those altitudes. Now, after my conversation with Rob, I happened to come across a fascinating study that ties into what he was talking about. The study was found on AINonline.com. It goes back a few years, about 10 years, I think, and it said pilots ignore oxygen regulations. More than 60% of business jet pilots do not use oxygen masks when required to by FAA regulations, according to a survey conducted by corporate pilot Chris Shaver for his master's thesis at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Shaver needed a safety-related project for his thesis, and he didn't want to rehash existing research on subjects that have been studied exhaustively. The question came up in hangar talk with some friends, he recalled. The FAA requires pilots to wear an oxygen mask under certain circumstances, and Shaver's research showed that most pilots do not comply with the rules. For Part 91 operators, no one may fly a pressurized aircraft above 35,000 feet without one pilot donning a mask. If quick donning masks are available, the threshold altitude rises to 41,000 feet. Above 41,000 feet, or if one pilot leaves the controls above 35,000 feet, one pilot must always be using supplemental oxygen. Part 135 pilots must use supplemental oxygen above 25,000 feet when one pilot is at the controls. When both are flying, one must be on oxygen above 35,000 feet. Part 121 pilots have a 35,000-foot threshold when one pilot is at the controls or flying above 35,000 feet in an aircraft with fewer than 30 seats or above 41,000 feet with more than 30 seats. The majority of those who participated in the survey do not take the FAA regulations for oxygen seriously, according to Shaver's results. Quote, "While there is ample research, regulation, and training available to pilots with regards to hypoxia and high-altitude cabin decompression," Shaver summarized, "an alarming number of aviators tend to adopt the 'it will not happen to me' attitude when faced with using supplemental oxygen. Many pilots think that the chance of an explosive decompression is so rare that the risk associated with no oxygen mask at high altitudes do not outweigh the potential rewards. Only 21% of Part 91 respondents indicated that they always use oxygen when one crew member leaves their duty station above 35,000 feet, according to the survey. 10% reported occasional use, 25% rarely, and 33% never. Above 41,000 feet under Part 91, the number who always use oxygen was 18%, occasionally was less than 1%, 8% rarely, 28% never, and 44% responded not applicable. The compliance numbers for Part 121 respondents were higher, with 39% reporting always using oxygen when required above 25,000 feet and 48% above 41,000 feet. Part 135 respondents were nearer the Part 91 results, with 21% saying they always use supplemental oxygen when only one crew member is at the controls above 25,000 feet, and 18% continuously using oxygen when flying above 35,000 feet. The results of the survey, according to Shaver, quote, "support the researchers' hypothesis that there is an attitude toward non-compliance with the supplemental oxygen regulations, and that Part 91 pilots are the most likely to forego the regulations on supplemental oxygen use. However, results also reveal that Part 135 pilots are slightly less likely to use supplemental oxygen than Part 91 pilots." And it made me start to wonder why that might be the case, and I think the FAA hazardous attitude invulnerability applies. And you maybe recall that essentially is the feeling that people have that it won't happen to me. And this comes from an FAA publication. It says, "Many people feel that accidents happen to others, but never to them." By the way, I used to feel that way when I was much younger. "They know accidents can happen, and they know that anyone can be affected, but they never really feel or believe that they will be the one involved. Pilots who think this way are more likely to take chances and run unwise risk, thinking all the time, 'it won't happen to me.'" And related to that, there was an article in AOPA.org. This is back in 1999, and it's by Robert Rossier. The title is Invulnerability, and I really like this first story. He says, "I've never been more shocked than the day I broke my leg skiing. I was 12 years old, way over my head on an icy slope. I lost control and slammed into an innocent bystander. My leg snapped like a frozen twig. I was dumbfounded. It was simply impossible that such a thing could happen to me. Accidents like this were only supposed to happen to other people." Perhaps our built-in sense of invulnerability is a survival mechanism that allows us to cope with the prospect of injury or death. If we truly believe that we would be injured or killed each time we climbed into the cockpit of an airplane, we'd never turn the starter. Of course, we don't think we're going to crash. We tend to believe that accidents happen to other pilots. Besides, virtually all the factors that affect safety are under our direct control. We know that as long as we make good decisions, we should never have an accident. However, this feeling of invulnerability should always be tempered by an equally strong sense of caution. Otherwise, this important survival mechanism becomes a serious safety liability. We may fail to stop and consider the very real risks that are involved in the actions we take. Well, good food for thought. Coming up next, my updates, and then we'll get to the Pilots Without Pants calendar, right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now for some updates. I'm going to keep this shorter than usual just because the show's running long, and I do want to get to that great interview with Pilots Without Pants. Let me tell you first about a YouTube video, which was really quite stunning. I mean, of all the things I've seen recently, this I highly recommend. The description talks about an incident in which a King Air, which was dropping parachute jumpers, went into a spin. And we have remarkable video from it because one of the jumpers is a videographer, and he captured the entire event. Here's what the description says from the YouTube link. It says, the Beechcraft C-90 King Air was trimmed up for the exit procedure at an altitude of 16,000 feet AGL for the second load of a planned 20X jump event. We opened the door and began the climb out. As is normal, the skydive team was fully focused on achieving correct positioning and exit timing. This intense focus on task resulted in many of the skydivers missing the telltale signs of an imminent stall. From the videographer exit position, outward, most tailward end of the jumper line, I felt the plane slip once and then twice, after which I knew something was wrong and decided to let go of the now banking aircraft. This all happened inside of just a few seconds. Those on the outside of the door and immediately inside of the door followed. With 9 of us initially in the sky, there were still 5 skydivers inside of the aircraft. The moment was surreal, and I could not believe what I was seeing. Everything happened in slow motion, and I remember thinking, am I really seeing the plane spinning nose down next to us? After the spin, the aircraft started to veer underneath us, but luckily did not make contact. As the aircraft started to recover from the stall, still unstable, 1 further skydiver exited, leaving 4 skydivers and the pilot in the aircraft. After I was satisfied that the aircraft had recovered, it is a fascinating and unusual thing to see your jump plane below you in free fall, I searched the sky for my team and found them building the pre-planned formation in a safe and normal manner. The aircraft returned and landed safely on the runway. The incident was promptly reported to the South African CAA and PASA National Safety and Training Officer. The next day, the jump team made adjustments to their exit procedures following discussion with the pilot, and no further incidents or near incidents were experienced. Now, there's a follow-up to the story, which came out on avweb.com. It says, pilot says too many jumpers outside led to King Air spin. Quote, the stall and subsequent spin happened when we allowed too many jumpers on the outside step, causing an aft center of gravity and excessive blocking of the airflow to the left horizontal stabilizer. The nose then pitched up beyond the controllability of the elevator, he said in a post that accompanied the video on YouTube. He said he quickly ran out of rudder and elevator, and after the right wing came over, he chopped power to both engines and began the recovery. The aircraft behaved very well, and the recovery was surprisingly easy, he said. I pulled out as gently as possible as I did not want to stress the airframe. There was some additional instability when I pulled out of the dive and pushed the throttles forward to power up, as the one engine spooled up much more quickly than the other and caused some asymmetrical moment. He also said the aircraft is intentionally flown with asymmetrical power for the release of jumpers to prevent them from being blasted by the prop wash from the left engine. Power is kept on the right engine to maintain altitude during the jump run, which typically takes 60 seconds, he wrote. A fair amount of right rudder is required to fly a straight line in this configuration. Pilot to maintain 95 to 90 knots indicated. He said the incident was reported to authorities and the aircraft inspected. He said the operation has now limited the number of jumpers outside to 5 at a time, and skydivers will be briefed to let go if the aircraft suddenly pitches up. And anyone who flies twin-engine aircraft knows that most twins are not certified for spins. They have not been tested for spins, and they're not known to be able to recover from spins. So this pilot was incredibly lucky, and I think you're going to find this video quite amazing to watch. And of course, there's a link to it in the show notes. And I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that there is a free online course available regarding takeoffs and landings that anybody can sign up to take. And it's from Cirrus Aircraft. They announced that the courses are for all aircraft enthusiasts and pilots, regardless of the aircraft type they fly. Now through the end of the year, the Cirrus Approach SR Series Takeoff and Landings flight training course is complimentary. Takeoffs and Landings provides an in-depth digital instruction on procedures to ensure every takeoff and landing is safe, predictable, and repeatable. And I've taken this course, and I highly recommend it to everyone. It runs about 5 hours, a lot of different videos, and it's really an excellent review for experienced pilots, and it provides a wealth of information for pilots with less experience. And by the way, the learning management system that Cirrus has is one of the best I have ever seen, especially for aviation. They have a lot of courses which cover a lot of different topics. Most of them charge a fee, but I think you'll find that these courses are really excellent, and you can try them out, obviously, for free without having to pay. The note here says, The Takeoffs and Landings course, Cirrus offers 10 real-world lessons through 5 hours of online training, from pre-flight preparation to proper maneuver execution. Pilots learn about stabilized approach, crosswind and slips, short-field takeoff and landings, night operations, abnormal or emergency considerations, and more. One thing they don't mention is a lot of the beginning of the course talks about runway considerations. So a lot of detail goes into the many, many different things you want to think about when calculating takeoff and landing performance. And they finish up here by saying nearly 50% of all aircraft incidents occur during the final descent and landing, while nearly 15% of incidents occur during takeoff and initial climb. With the Takeoff and Landings course, Cirrus helps ensure pilots are prepared and master the skills necessary for safe takeoffs and landings. Now, to take the course, just go out to the cirrusapproach.com website, and then off on the right-hand side, you're going to click on the thing that says Takeoffs and Landings, and then you can sign up for the course. And I believe that the CAPS course on how to use the Cirrus Airframe Parachute System, or CAPS, is also a free course, so you might want to sign up for that if you're interested in learning more about the CAPS parachute system and how it works. Now, after you register for either of these courses, somewhere you can indicate who your flight instructor is. So if you want, go ahead and put down my name, Max Truscott, if you'd like. Anyway, I encourage people to check out these courses. Now, my goal with this podcast is to make sure that everyone, no matter how experienced or inexperienced you are, comes away with at least one nugget that they can use from each and every episode. So if you learned something today, think about how much value does that bring you. In other words, if you were getting ground instruction and you were learning the same kinds of things, what would you pay for that? What's that worth for you? And then consider making a donation to Aviation News Talk to help support the show. 2 easy ways to do that. You can sign up via our Patreon site at different dollar levels, and for each level, you can get various goodies. For example, people who are signed up at the $20 and above level have already seen the video of the Rob Mark conversation that we had on the first half of this show. And that video is not just two talking heads, but includes a lot of reports and photos and other things related to the accidents that we talked about. People who sign up at the $8 level also get our show notes each week, which shows you the script that I'm using, and it shows you the news stories that we had to cut for time. To sign up for Patreon, just head on out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, because you're all awesome listeners. Enter your credit card and choose what dollar level you'd like to support the show at. Also, if you'd like to make a one-time donation rather than a monthly donation, you can do that via PayPal, and you don't even need a PayPal account to do that. Just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal and make a one-time donation. Now, let me briefly tell you about the people who signed up to support the show in the last week. We have one new mega supporter who I mentioned last week. That's Troy Bainbridge. What I didn't tell you is that he's a CFI who teaches out of the Weed and Redding airports in Northern California. He also specializes in paragliders and has an advanced P4 rating and T3 tandem instructor rating. Other people who've signed up for Patreon, we have Daniel French, Jeff Willis, and Renato Steinberg, and Chris, who all signed up at the $20 a month level. And Joe Silvernail signed up at the $35 a month level, so he has access to my online courses. We also have some one-time donations via PayPal. My thanks to Richard Selman for a $100 donation. Christopher Redman, who donated $50 and says, "Thank you for your efforts in producing the best aviation podcast out there, Max." Thanks so much, Christopher. That makes me smile. And finally, Brendan Donovan, who donated $25. And I want to thank everyone who supports the show in whatever way you do, whether it's leaving reviews online in the podcast app that you're listening to, sending us financial donations, or even sending your email and questions. Thanks so much for supporting the show. Next up, we'll be talking with Annemarie Bain, who has developed an unusual calendar that she calls Pilots Without Pants, and it's a fundraiser to raise money for an aviation scholarship. And just to be clear, this is a totally clean calendar. Everything is strategically covered. Now, generally on this show, we talk about safety-related issues, but this struck me as funny. Plus, it's for a good cause, which is why I decided to run this segment. But I also know that everyone has a slightly different sense of humor. So if you don't think it's funny, you don't have to listen, which is why I put it at the end of the show. But if you do think it's funny, you may want to check out the video version of this interview, which I posted on YouTube so that everyone, all listeners, can see it, whether you're a Patreon supporter or not. And you can see the pictures that go along with all the stories that Annemarie tells about the calendar. So coming up next, our interview about Pilots Without Pants on the Aviation News Talk podcast. Well, it is that time of year to start thinking about buying gag gifts for your pilot friends. So if you're interested in buying some copies for this worthy cause, the calendar sells for $19.95, and I've made a custom link so that it's easy for you to order. Just go to aviationnewstalk.com/calendar, and that will take you to Annemarie's website that's mentioned in our conversation. Now let me tell you a little about Annemarie Bain. Annemarie is not a pilot, but she can be forgiven for that as she's married to one. She's a producer, videographer, editor, and photographer based in Long Island, New York. She's worked extensively in television as a post-producer with The Maury Povich Show and as an Emmy Award-winning producer with The Tyra Banks Show. She's also the creator of the Pilots Without Pants calendar. And one of you may be getting a free copy of that calendar because she gave me a calendar to donate to one of our Patreon supporters. If you want to be eligible for that drawing, just make sure you sign up for Patreon no later than November 30th. At aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And in early December, I'll choose a winner from people who've signed up prior to November 30th. Now here's our conversation with Annemarie Bain. Well, Annemarie, thanks so much for contacting me about this, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, before we get started, I think people should know, if the movie industry were rating this calendar that we're talking about, this is PG-13, suitable for all audiences or not?
It depends. I mean, maybe you wouldn't put it up in your 5-year-old's room, but I don't think it'd be harmful for a 5-year-old to see it necessarily.
Right, of course, because everything is covered here, even though we've got a name which might suggest that it's not. Well, good. So now that we got that out of the way, which is pretty important, I understand the calendar's a fundraiser. Tell us about that. Where does the money go?
We're going to build a scholarship fund for a student on Long Island, or maybe two, depending on how well we do with this calendar, who might not necessarily be able to afford to continue their aviation studies.
And I guess you've done that in the past, so you've given money away to students before?
Yes, but not through the sales of Pilots Without Pants.
Got it. Okay. Well, it's a very catchy name, Pilots Without Pants. Tell us how you came up with the idea for the calendar. What was going on, and was there any alcohol being consumed at the time?
Funny you should mention that, because there were copious amounts of alcohol being served.
I suspected that.
Every Wednesday, and it's still going on to this day, we have a Wednesday social where we drink wine and eat cheese, and the pilots all hang out and talk about past triumphs and failures and what's going on in their lives. And one particular night, and this was over 10 years ago, we were trying to figure out some fundraising ideas. And I thought, hey, let's do a nude calendar. After maybe my third or fourth glass of wine, I was feeling it. And so was everybody else. Everybody was like, yeah, that'd be great. Oh, boy. Yeah, let's do this thing. Hey, Maria, you're going to do the photography. I'll do the photography. I'll do the printing, and I'll put it all together. This will be great. And everybody thought it was an amazing idea until I showed up. I showed up with my camera that weekend afterwards and started going around and going, okay, y'all made a promise to me, even though you weren't sober. I'm holding you to it, and we are going to build a calendar.
So tell us about the organization that you proposed this to, that you see every Wednesday night.
It's the Antique Airplane Club of Greater New York, and I believe my husband was the president at that time, too. Basically, it's just an antique airplane club, and we do a fly-in every year in August, and now September, I believe. And we just enjoy flying antique airplanes. And
where is the club based out of? Which airport are you associated with?
It's Bayport Aerodrome Society, and the airport designator is 23N.
And I think it's a grass strip. And I hear it's the only one left in Long Island. I guess in the past there were something like 30 grass strips, and now they're all gone, and it's down to just this one.
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad. But I'm sure you folks have a lot of fun there. So it sounds like you had some ready, willing volunteers, and then you had to twist the arms of others, or how did that work out?
Some people, I had to get the permission of their wives and talk to their wives and basically say, this is what I'm doing. And most of them are like, okay, just get them out of the house. And my husband, of course, had to do it because...
Well, yes.
I'm in charge, so
right,
I say.
We understand how that works out. So I'm looking at the cover right now, and for folks who are watching the video of this, they'll be able to see that. And let me just bring that up.
Sure.
And we are looking at the cover, and the cover is really stunning. I mean, this is no. I mean, it's really interesting. I've never seen a concept like this anywhere, but it was a rather novel idea. It's got a Cessna 140 in the background, and there's a gentleman who looks like he's planning to commute to work. Tell us about that.
Yes, this is the model known as the Cover Boy 2022. And he is dressed in 1950s garb as much as he could pull together for the cover of this to look like a businessman going for his commute. The thing that cracked me up the most was he kept putting off the shoot because his sock garters hadn't come in yet. He went and ordered sock garters for this, which I was both pleased and horrified at the same time. And I couldn't keep a straight face when he walked out with his briefcase and his sock garters.
Well, it is really hilarious. I mean, this gentleman looks like he could have come off the set for the TV show Mad Men.
Yes.
Which was set in the early 1960s. He's got his pipe. There's smoke coming out of it. He's got the hats that were so common until probably the mid-1960s. Men really stopped wearing hats. He's got his briefcase and tie, but not a whole lot else on. And, of course, the briefcase is strategically positioned, so it's a clean photo like all the rest of them in the calendar.
And those sock garters.
Well, it is funny because, this is he looks like a commuter. You refer to him as being a commuter. And the very next model of this aircraft, the Cessna 150, had a commuter version. So they actually called it, the Cessna 150 commuter. So pretty funny to see this on the cover.
Yeah, I love the photo. We had a good time shooting it.
Well, we've got January here with a Stearman in the background. And what more can you tell us about this?
Okay, this very Stearman was in the very first edition of Pilots Without Pants, and this man's grandfather posed for me. So that was kind of cool when it came to this year, and I spoke to our model, and I said, hey, your grandfather can't do it this year. How about you? And it was a hard no at first, and then he started thinking about it. And I said, listen, I'll treat you nice. I will make it as comfortable as possible. And of course, 20 other pilots stood behind me as I was shooting this, making fun of the poor man.
Well, that's what pilots do for each other. We like to make fun of each other. Well, funny that they're keeping it
super supportive,
keeping it all in the family. Well, February is really iconic. We've got a 1946 Aeronca Chief, which, by the way, people are probably not as familiar with the Chief as they are with the Champ. The Champ outsold the Aeronca Chief by about 4-1. The Chief had side-by-side seating and yoke controls. But the gentleman standing in front of it, well, what is he doing there?
Well, he's pretending to play a banjo. Why do I say pretending? He doesn't know how to play the banjo, and I thought that was a very interesting choice of stuff to cover his goodies with. And I was like, dude, play me a song while we hear it, man. He's like, I can't really because I don't know how to play that. I'm like, okay, this makes no sense, but all right, I'm shooting the picture and fine.
Got it. Well, it's pretty funny because I can't remember any other aviation photos with banjos in them. So this may set a new trend. Now, this is Mr. March here, 1933 Waco UBF-2 biplane. And I do recognize what he's reading there. Tell us about that.
That is General Aviation News, and they have been a great friend of Pilots Without Pants and Bayport Aerodrome and the Antique Airplane Club of Greater New York, and they publish my photos kind of often, and very grateful for that. The edition he is holding is a picture I shot of my husband in the Cub, which you really can't see from here, but I wanted to give a nod to General Aviation News for being so kind to us. So we used that to cover Mr. March's goodies.
It's a great photo, and our tip of the hat to Ben Sclair and his entire team up there at General Aviation News. Great publication. All right, jumping ahead to April. This is a 1940 N3N biplane. Great photography, by the way. I love the blue sky and the green foreground, and great big yellow famous airplane. And then, of course, there's Mr. Bill.
There he is. He has been in every calendar, every Pilots Without Pants calendar since I started. Always very patient with me, always very creative with me. The funniest memory I have of this photo, though, is afterwards. He comes up behind me, he's about to take off, and he said, "Listen, get in the airplane." I said, "Well, you're not wearing anything. What are we doing?" He goes, "You're going to shoot me up in the sky flying without my pants on." And away we went for a hilarious half-hour flight over Fire Island and Long Island Sound with him not wearing much at all.
Well, when you first contacted me, you emailed me that photo, and so here it is. We've got, and I thought this deserved to be in the calendar. It is just hysterical. This gentleman is fairly old, white hair, and you kind of see him from the mid chest up, and it's hilarious. I mean, it is, kind of, what can we say? Kind of wrinkled, grizzled, pilot flying as a steerman in an open air cockpit over the right next to the Long Island Sound there. So it's just a really funny picture.
Thank you. We had a lot of fun. We went live on Facebook with this, and people were like, "Annemarie, you're always getting into some sort of trouble. What is going on here?" It's like, we're flying nude. Let's go.
Well, we can't tell that from the picture, so we'll have to take your word for it. So going up to March, this is a Vans RV experimental aircraft, and I'm guessing that's the airplane owner in front of it?
That is correct. And his wife was the one, we were trying to find something to cover his goodies. And his wife was the one that found the Air Show Today sign. And it was just a stroke of genius on her part. It looked really good.
It's pretty funny. All right, so let's jump ahead here and we'll take a look at June. This is a 1931 Brunner Winkle Bird airplane. I have never heard of that. I'm guessing that's a pretty rare antique aircraft.
I only know of two. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I do. There's one at Bayport, and then there's one at Lufker Airport, which he's based.
Got it.
He looks like a 1950s movie star with those shades on, though, and that beautiful smile of his.
And, of course, we've got the strategically placed engine cowling or something like that in front of him, just like all the other photos, so well covered up. All right, moving on to Mr. July. Now, this is an Aranca Champ, which has the tandem seating and joystick controls. So tell us about Mr. July.
Oh, Mr. July. We only met maybe an hour before I shot this photo. We didn't know each other. So he volunteered through someone else to be in the calendar, and I thought that was amazing. But imagine meeting someone you just met. Imagine meeting somebody and then having them go, "Okay, get naked."
All right. And again, he's got, looks like an airplane spinner or something there, which is covering him
That's
up.
right.
So good choice on his part there. Let's see, jumping ahead to August. This is a very famous airplane. This is a 1975 Citabria, of which there are zillions around and very popular aircraft to fly. And we've got the gentleman standing here in front of it. And what's he doing?
Well, he was holding a blank sign when I shot this photo because we couldn't think of what we wanted to have on it. And it took me a little while, and then I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to put on the sign flying. The second best thing you can do with your pants off. I assume that's correct, right?
Yeah, in fact, I know a seaplane pilot who always refers to seaplane flying that way as well, too. So, a popular saying. All right, Mr. September, a 1937 Ryan STA. This is, I got to say, a very cool airplane picture. This thing is all brushed aluminum. It's got a monster propeller in the front of it, and probably the thing that's most distinctive about it are the strut wires, the support wires that go from the fuselage out to the wingtips that support the wing. So great looking airplane.
An even better looking model.
Well, okay.
If I don't say that, this man is like a brother to me. If I don't say that, he'll come after me and it'll be very ugly. So I just want to say,
Got
you
it.
are
All
so
right,
handsome.
super. Yep. Then we can't disagree with you on that one then. All right, so jumping ahead here to October. Now, this looks like we're parked along a flight line. I see about 3 airplanes, a Citabria and a couple Cessnas that are parked up against a line of trees. Now, do the airplanes just park outside at the airport there?
That's where they're tied down at Bayport, the people that don't have hangars with us.
Got it. All right, and we've got a gentleman in the foreground here.
Oh, yeah. And I thought he was going to fly in for his, because he does own an airplane. He owns an Aerobat. But he drove into the airport for his photo shoot, which I thought was interesting. I said, well, where's your plane? Because, well, it's too windy. So I can't fly. I was like,
Smart.
well, I should be shooting you with your airplane. He's like, well, I said, well, okay, we'll use these airplanes here and we'll get you a gas can. And
Well-positioned gas can as usual. All right, so I should be wishing you a happy birthday. I understand that November is the month of your birth date, and why is that significant to this? By the way, we've got a 1946 Air Coupe featured here for November.
yes, that is my husband, my ever-loving hubby. And I put him in every Pilots Without Pants calendar, whether he wants to be in it or not, on November, because that's my birthday month, and that's my little way of celebrating my marriage and my old age.
Got it. And the fact that you're still having lots of fun. All right, speaking of fun, we're up to December here. We've got a Stearman, and this pilot is in his Santa Claus hat, and he's got Fluffy the bear, who seems to be well-positioned.
Fluffy the bear, yes. Fluffy the bear, not there out of her own will, obviously, but yeah, that's our Mr. December flying off to spread Christmas cheer in his Stearman airplane with his teddy bear.
Excellent. All right, so we have wrapped up the calendar. I see you do a lot of excellent videos to promote this as well. One of them looked like a takeoff from Austin Powers and Dr. Evil. So you apparently have a background in video production. Tell us about that.
I have been in the video profession for, almost 30 years. And I've worked in television for 20 and worked in the corporate sphere for almost 5 years now. But my main profession is actually video production, video producing, and photography is a second love of mine. The Austin Powers looking video where, they kept yelling up at the airplane, calling it Johnson and whatnot. That was a promo for a beer that was named after the calendar that was brewed here on Long Island, Pilots Without Pants Ale, which was so amazing that someone named a beer after this calendar. And it was a good beer, a really good beer.
That's great. So you're taking the world by storm with this calendar, obviously. I'm thinking that people shouldn't just buy one of these calendars, but maybe 5 or 10 of them and give them away to all their pilot friends or give them away at a holiday party. And aren't these kind of the perfect gag gift for people to buy in bulk and give away to their friends?
Absolutely. I mean, if you buy 10 or 15, 30, 40, not being greedy, but not only are you helping a student achieve their aviation dream, but you're also taking care of a Christmas list. I mean, think about the supply chain and what's not coming your way. But I can get you one of these calendars in the mail this week.
That's great. That's great. Well, we have a lot of very supportive listeners who like helping good causes. If they decide to buy lots of your calendars and you run out, will you go back on press and print some more?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, 100%. That'd be amazing.
Great. And so where do people go to order this calendar?
They can go to, if you're on Long Island, you can go to Bayport Aerodrome on a weekend, and you can buy it personally from one of the pilots in the calendar. Or, if you want to save some gas, you can just go to our website, my website, imageamb.com/PWOP.
And of course, we'll have a link to that in our show notes. Annemarie Bain, thank you so much for coming on and giving us a good laugh today, and good luck with your fundraising effort.
Thank you, and what a pleasure it was to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, my thanks to Annemarie. I always love creative ideas, and of course, if you have a little fun along the way, that makes it even better. Remember, if you'd like to order a calendar, you can either look for the link in our show notes or just go out to this short link that I created, go to a web browser, and enter aviationnewstalk.com/calendar. And remember, if you've been thinking about signing up to support the show but haven't gotten around to do it, this month is the perfect time to do it, because you might win that free calendar. Just make sure you sign up at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome before November 30th. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.